Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Rosie. I am on the Employer Advocate team, and this is Christy. She is our technical expert, so you probably haven't heard her on the phones, but she does help you frequently. This session, we're going to be going over a lot of the basics when it comes to wage and contribution reporting. So to get started, let's switch over. For our agenda, we're going to be reviewing the payroll calendars, where you're going to be able to view those and how you can request a change on that payroll calendar frequency. We're going to go over a bit about the online entry process, and we're also going to talk about some frequently asked questions as far as it pertains to file uploads and where you can find some resources on how to resolve some common issues with file uploaders. We're also going to go a bit over severance reporting and defining what severance is. And again, we're going to review some of the reports available to you in submission reports within ERM. So I'm going to take this a second just to get situated. And to start us off, we're going to talk about the payroll calendars. So the frequencies are what your period dates are going to be based off of. So depending on the kind of payroll frequency that your unit has set up, you're going to be reporting during that amount of days. Some of them are a little bit more flexible, others are much more rigid. I would definitely say the most common payroll frequency is probably a bi-weekly payroll. I'm sure many of you guys probably report on that basis. But as you can see here, there's a number of different options. This is something that does not have to be set in stone forever. You can update the payroll frequency for your submission unit. On the next slide, I'll have some information about what information is needed for that. But while we're sitting here, I did want to touch on some of the payroll frequencies. So typically when it comes to the regular reporting, you're probably using a weekly, bi-weekly, maybe a semi-monthly, maybe even a monthly reporting schedule. But we also have the annual calendar, which is our most flexible payroll calendar option. That one allows you to report from anywhere from 1 day up to 366 days, just to account for the leap year. When it comes to those annual calendars, those can be really helpful for special one-time days. Maybe there's some stipend that's getting paid out. It's not necessarily going to be reported at the same time as your regular weekly pay frequency, but you definitely still need to report it. So using an annual calendar could be a really great option to get that reported, not have it affect your bi-weekly payroll reporting. And you just have it allotted for a single day. Sometimes you have to do larger adjustments. So if there's a teacher that you forgot to enroll last year and you're getting them caught up, you can use the annual frequency to report them for a larger stretch of time. Though with that, we definitely do want to be mindful of keeping it within the term, that fiscal year, or if with PERF, we don't keep it within the fiscal quarter for adjustment. But if you ever need to look at the payroll dates that you currently have in your submission unit, this is going to be found on the Manage Submission Unit screen in ERM. So it's kind of hidden a little bit, but underneath the Employer tab and then underneath the Submission Unit tab, you'll go to Manage Submission Unit. There's a little black tab in the middle of the screen that's titled W plus C for Wage and Contribution. That's where you're going to find your payroll frequencies. If it says that it's end dated, then it's not going to be a calendar that you guys are actively using anymore, but we still have them in there just for record keeping. But for any active calendar, you can always click view on that and you'll see the following screens. So typically, if this is your payroll that you're using regularly, you're going to have that little drop down menu where you have to select the particular year that you're going to view. And then after doing that, you'll see the list of your payroll dates. So in the image on the right, you'll see those top payroll dates that are kind of grayed out. Those can no longer be edited or changed because they have already been used. And in order for them to be considered used by the payroll calendar, that just means there has to be, at the very least, a validated report. So, for example, looking at this, it looks like the last used payroll date was 8/30 in 2024. In this example, we could no longer change that 8/30 payroll unless it was still in validated status and you deleted it. Then we could change it, but for the next payroll that's still in white, that for September date, we'd be able to go in there and edit that if that's not aligning with what your records need that date to be, as well as getting the dates after that. And while we're on payroll calendars, I also want to note that the payroll calendar for the next year, they release their auto-generated the first week of November. So starting in November, once you guys have those payroll dates for the next year, we encourage you to send those all in an email to us. Any of them need to be corrected. So you just previously saw how you can review those dates. Once they've been generated, you can look through them, and there's a chance that none of them need to be changed. But if you do spot any that definitely do need to be, maybe it auto-generated on holiday, or it's just not the date that you guys use for your schedule, just send us an email with your submission unit number, the payroll date that needs to be changed, and what it should be. And we'll go ahead and get that changed for you. If you do have more than one active running payroll frequency, I would definitely ask that you let us know which of those frequencies need to be changed, just because there are some units that have a bi-weekly and a monthly calendar for reporting different kinds of employees within the same unit. But again, we are always more than happy to get this updated for you. If it's just one or two dates, you can definitely give us a call, and we'd be happy to just get that corrected for you while we have you on the phone. But if it's going to be a long list of dates, or really the whole school year, it's really best if you just send it in an email, just so that way we can make sure that we get that all updated. We'll just send you an email back once we have that all complete. But with the payroll date additions, that is more so in relation to the annual calendars. Like I was saying, with the stipend pays, or just other unusual one-time payments that you might be needing to report. We ask that you only request those payroll dates within 30 days of you using them. And the reason for that is just because in our internal finance department, when we have those payroll dates, we are anticipating something to be reported on them. And sometimes if payroll dates are created, maybe at the beginning of the school year, but then September runs around and you guys end up not using some payroll date that you thought you would, then it kind of creates some confusion internally. So we try to ask that they are going to be created within a month of them being used, just to make sure that we don't have a ton of payroll dates that end up never being used. But just reach out to us, and we're always happy to get that added for you. And this is going over just how you can change that frequency. So for example, if you're currently reporting on a bi-weekly pay frequency, but your unit's made a decision and you guys are actually going to be paying people on a weekly basis going forward, we can change that frequency to make sure that that's aligned to how your payroll works now. All we ask is that you send the following information to us in an email. We'll send you a template that basically has all these bullet points where you can just reply with the answer that we need, and then we'll go ahead and get that changed. Typically, we ask that you give us about 3 business days just to get that updated. Once we have all of the information from you, but it's a pretty simple process. But there are some units again that have more than one payroll frequency. So if there's ever a need where maybe your cafeteria workers get paid on a weekly basis, but some of your other employees get paid on a bi-weekly basis, you can definitely have those 2 concurrent payroll frequencies. Just reach out to us and we can assist in making sure that's accurate. And then on this next slide, I have the Indiana code listed for the definition of compensation. I won't bore you with reading it all out to you right now, but this is a resource that is publicly available to you at any time. So if you ever need help locating that Indiana code, you are more than welcome to send us an email or give us a call, and we can point you in that direction, just so that you can go over the legal definition of that. But essentially, it is wages that will show up on your W-2. It is going to be perf or turf related wages that should be reported to us, and contributions will be due. So bonuses, stipends, grants, basic wages, overtime, all of those things are considered compensation, and contributions would be due on. And then I also wanted to show you where you can find some resources here. So on our public website, in.gov/empers, you can find some ERM manuals that go over different processes that a lot of employers are going to be responsible for. That wage and contribution user manual I find is quite helpful if you're someone who like sees a lot of like terms in ERM and you're not quite sure like what exactly that's trying to communicate to you. The glossary can also be like a nice resource, especially just like Control F search and trying to figure out like what specifically they're referencing or meaning by certain phrases. But also like just like for like beginner employees, or if you're trying to train someone else who's going to be an ERM user, our ERM overview or employer management and member management resources are very helpful. But if you did want to learn any more about some of like the really great resources that we have on our website, I would encourage you to visit our employer resources breakout session later, because they're going to be going a lot more in depth with the variety of resources that we have on our public website. But in general, like I highly recommend that like, you browse through a few, and if you find any that are particularly helpful for you, saving them to your desktop, naming it something that's like really easy to just like pull up and search when you need it. And that Control F search to try to find something related to like what you need help with can be a really big game changer when it comes to like, feeling like you are capable of like making these changes and updates yourself. But again, if you're ever unsure, we are incredibly available to you, so never hesitate to give us a call or send us an email if you are confused or if you have any questions or would like any assistance. But we also have some additional quick reference guides located on our website. And again, these are going over like all sorts of things from file uploads, wage contribution errors, like what they mean, what exactly ERM is wanting you to do to resolve those errors. As well as just like how to manage the members and life events in ERM. But again, definitely would recommend checking out that breakout session simply about our different resources on there. On our next slide, I'll move on to our online entrance screen. So I'm sure many of you have seen this. With just like a raise of hands, like how many of you like report wages and contributions for your unit? Okay, perfect. So then I'm sure plenty of you are familiar with online entry. Typically, we find that submission units that have, well over like 20 employees typically use file upload, but a lot of people use online entry as well. This just allows you to, manually select information with the online entry screen. You'll see here, there's like a little drop-down menu where you'll select your payroll frequency. So more than often, that's going to be your standard frequency, whether that's bi-weekly, weekly, semi-monthly. And then you'll have to select the available payroll date. Of course, like if you're reporting like as usual, it's typically the next available date. But if you were to ever choose a date that's like further in advance, ERM will ask you if you want to skip that previous payroll date. And then you'll just have like a skipped report, just saying that essentially there's nothing to report for the payroll that you had previously. If you were to need to report something on the annual calendar, like for example, like when I talk about those grants, this would be the area in which you would select that annual calendar and choose that payroll date, just to be able to again have that wiggle room with how big or small that period range is. But on the next screen here, there are always these two options available to you, though they do different things. New report is going to do exactly what it sounds like. It's going to generate a completely new report. It's not going to automatically fill in a lot of the information that you need there. But the create new from previous report, that is pulling in everything from your last paid regular wage and contribution report. So this is going to pull in what members were on that last regular wage and contribution report. What was the period date range on that last regular wage and contribution report? It's going to start it on like the next day, like following that period date range. One thing to note though is that it's not going to pull in information that were performed on wage and contribution adjustments. So for example, if you had like a member that was enrolled and they weren't on your last payroll period, but you did an adjustment, missed wage and contribution adjustment, to get them caught up with the rest of the unit. If you create new from previous, they will not be on that report because they were not previously on the last regular wage and contribution report. So whenever there's like any changes, there's anyone new in your unit, or you know that you had to do like some big adjustments to get something caught up, definitely take the time to just review the report that generates and make sure that like everyone that should be on there is on there, everyone that shouldn't be isn't. Things of that nature. There have been a couple times even where like a member is on leave of absence, but they process the report, not realizing that like members need to come off because they didn't actually receive payment during that time. So even though like it's very reliable with the information that it pulls through, you still want to review that for accuracy and just making sure that like the wages like haven't changed for anyone, and again, everything that should be on there. But with the new report, you'll see like this is what it looks like just like at the default. It's not pulling in like anyone in particular. You'll have to click the add members button to get everybody onto the report that you need to read versus the, okay, sorry, and this is what that screen would look like when you go to add in your members. Of course, like for security reasons, we like cleared out like the actual member names, but in that white box is where you'll see like the information for the members within the submission unit that you had selected. From here, you'll just choose everything to be on there, and you'll be able to get them added on. And we also wanted to point out some details here. So when you do create like a new report, you'll have to click modify on each members that you add onto there to type in the period date range for that particular report, as well as like adding the wages and adding the calculated contributions for those wages. We also wanted to highlight that last check date box because that is used to terminate a member, but it also should only ever be used for terminating a member. If that member is not like separating employment with your submission unit, that box should always be blank. Otherwise, you might accidentally like term someone who's like absolutely still an active participating member. On this next slide, it'll show you a little bit more of what it looks like if you were to create from a previous report. So again, we had like link up that member information, but essentially it'll just like autofill with all the people that were on the last report. And if you were to click modify, it'll have the wages and contributions they had reported last time. So if they were to like maybe have a little like overtime on this payment, so you need to like click modify and update their wages and contributions, you do that there. But you'll see if it says like update required, no, you'll be able to validate the report. If it does say that an update is required, that means that like something is missing on there, and like you do need to modify that and like make sure that whatever is missing is present. So that might be like adding the contributions, or maybe like you added a member to the previously created report. But yeah, you just want to make sure that everybody on there, like it says no, and you'll be able to move forward with sending that over for validation. And if there is ever anybody like on a like create a new report from previous, and they don't have any wages to report for that time period, you'll just want to delete them off of the report. Like if there's nothing to report there, they just won't be on there. And then you'll be able to like move forward with validating the report. Just because like that is something that will definitely hold you up from being able to move forward and processing that. But for the final upload portion, we wanted to like point out some of our resources for that part. So on our public website, if you ever are working with like a payroll software company and they're asking you for the file specifications, totally understandable if you are not capable of like parsing out exactly how the file needs to be built. We have some pre-built resources there that give you the very specific details on like what is needed for those files. And you can also use this yourself to create your own payroll files if you are somebody who feels like comfortable with that level of like just like programming and coding. They are available with like different like kinds of like Windows operation systems. So you'll just need to like browse through and see like what you or your vendor would be needing. But again, these are publicly available. So even if you're not 100% sure what your software vendor would need, you can still send them that link and they'll be able to gather the information that they will need in order to create that file template for you. But it also has some resources in regard to like resolving common file upload issues. So one of these resources on here, like they kind of go over some of the like common errors that you might see, like when your file fails, like when there's something preventing it from validating. And that can be really helpful to kind of help troubleshoot. So, you know, sometimes with the files, they can be very finicky. There's even like a single type missing, the whole file won't be accepted. So having these kind of explain what those error messages mean can be very helpful for those who report wages. But I definitely encourage you to give those a review when you have the time. But we also have like some other type of files that actually help to upload like members in your submission units. You don't have to manually do that in the enrolling member screen. So even if you already have everything figured out when it comes to like online entry and file upload for wage and contribution reporting, especially at the beginning of the school year where you probably have like a lot more people being enrolled, that can be like a really helpful resource just to get everybody in there without having to like take the time to like manually enroll everyone. On this next screen, if you are doing a file upload, one thing to keep note of is that payroll date has to match a date on one of your calendars that you've selected. If you enter a date and one of your submission units doesn't show up, like for example, if you have a perf and a turf unit, but for some reason only the perf is showing up when your file is meant for both of them, that means that like the turf unit in this example doesn't have that payroll date available, and that is the point in which like you should call us or send us an email so that way we can see if that payroll date needs to be changed or if it needs to be added to your calendar. But if everything goes swimmingly and both of those units show up or the unit that you're looking for shows up, you'll be able to move forward to send that file to validate. And then on our next screen, I have that guide that I was referencing before for troubleshooting your file uploads. So often, you might see like, try to choose one of these. But for example, let's say selected report type does not match report. So in that file, it's saying like, you'll want to make sure that all of them have that type character at the end. Another thing to keep in mind as well is like on your files, you'll see like they have like a little N or an A at the end of the line. And that's designating like the type of file that it is, between being like a missed wage and contribution adjustment or just a general adjustment file, or it may have an R for being a regular wage and contribution report. We'll want to make sure that that is definitely aligning with the type of report you're trying to upload, because that will itself create like issues. If, for example, you're trying to upload a regular wage and contribution report, but it's coded as an A file, it's not going to be accepted. So that's one of those things that you can review and just like make sure that's not what is preventing it from going through. But I definitely would encourage you to have this one downloaded to your computer and have it named something that's very easy for you to search, just in case if you do run into these, if you guys do use file uploads. Some common issues there. So again, that payroll date in the file and your RAM, they have to match in order for you to have that populate for you to complete the upload. We also want to make sure that all of the dates are formulated with the 2 numbers for the months, 2 numbers for the days, 4 for the year. We definitely don't have any blank spaces in any of those fields, and we always want to make sure that everything ends in that type character. But also you'll want to make sure, going back to the payroll dates, and the payroll date on your file just matches what you are manually entering into ERM. From there, I'm going to talk about severance reporting. So severance wages, it's going to most often be that payout of PTO at the end of employment. Severance wages are only ever going to be in anticipation of retirement. So, if you guys pay out your PTO at the end of every school year, that does not mean that everybody has severance every year. It's only going to be considered severance if they are retiring that year, when they are getting that payout. So again, we want to make sure that severance is reported appropriately. So that does mean it's not going to go into that regular wages box that the majority of your reporting is taking place in. Instead, it will go in a separate little box that's titled severance wages, and the contributions are calculated a little bit differently. If the severance wages total less than $2,000, you essentially report it the same way that you would regular wages, just in a separate column. But if it does go above $2,000, and again, these are going to be gross wages, then you're only going to be calculating the contributions on the first $2,000. If the mandatory contribution, which per perf and turf is that 3% contribution, is paid for by the unit, typically it's going to still be capped on the first $2,000. But if it is member paid, or if it's post-tax, and the member was actually you guys did deduct the full amount of that contribution, then there are really only 2 ways to handle that. Either you can report the total percentage, like the 3% on the total severance wages that they were actually deducted, or you would need to report like the first $2,000 worth of that 3%, and the member will need to be reimbursed for the remaining amount that they were deducted previously. But in general, like if you only deducted 3% on the first 2,000, then you'll only report the 3% on the first $2,000 of severance wages. But for that employer contribution share, because that is always paid for by the unit, it will only ever be on the first $2,000 of severance wages for perf and for turf. The system will not allow you to pay additional money for that employer contribution share. But on the next screen, I have an example of what that severance reporting will look like in ERM. So this is essentially like what you would see if you were doing this like in online entry or maybe as an adjustment. So as you can see, like in the example on one side, we have like the contributions like as it looks like with perf and one with turf. So on the right, you can also see we have an example of the pre-tax contribution calculated on the first $2,000. And then on the right side of the right example, what it would look like if it was calculated on the total amount of those severance wages. So in this example, it is up to you as the employer on whether or not you want to grant like that additional money for that mandatory contribution. Since that is like a pre-tax unit, that means like it is being paid by the employer. But you're only required to pay the $60 for that mandatory contribution on those severance wages. Versus on that leftmost example, you can see what it looks like to report severance wages. And actually, yes, for someone who has less than $2,000 in severance wages, where essentially it's calculated the exact same way, just in a separate column. Once that's validated, you would head over to submission reports. So now we're going to go over some of the different reports available to you in submission reports. And I want to make a note that any of the reports in submission reports are available to you as long as VRM exists. So I know that often it's kind of like protocol for a lot of people who report the wages and contributions to print off some of these reports just to say for documentation purposes. But you know, if you did ever forget to print that off like immediately after paying it, it's not a huge worry because it will be there available to you tomorrow, the next month, next year, etc. But the first thing I want to go over is the report summary. And in this screen, this is actually before like you would have selected any of the reports, but the mandatory contribution button is highlighted in the bottom there because like if you ever see that button like lit up where it's not grayed out like it looks like in the picture, but it is like a clickable button, that means that there are retroactive contributions due. So you'll find that with if your unit offers you know, a hybrid and a my choice option, either perf or turf, then there's going to be some members that have not yet made their plan election, but they have wages to report. Because we don't know if they're going to be a my choice or a hybrid member, we can't really charge you for the contributions because like that is like variable. So for that time, like you will report those wages, but no contributions are due. But once we have received their plan election decision that's in process, or if we did receive their plan election decision and they defaulted, then we will have those contributions retroactively calculated based off of the plan that they entered, and they will be added on to the next report due. So that is when you'll see that mandatory contribution button lit up when you go like process the report. And it will require you to click on that to essentially like add those contributions to that report that you're trying to pay. And you won't be able to move forward until that button has been clicked if it is activated. But in the other little circle bit, that is just kind of showing you the breakdown of the different like contributions and like wages there, and just like how that can be like most easily viewable to you like when you're looking at that report. But with the actual reports that you can pull from submission reports, I want to go over the summary report first. This is essentially like a receipt. So again, you can access this at any time, but it just kind of breaks down that summary of like what was paid and what exactly was that payment for. So breaking down onto like the different types of the contribution, whether it's pre or post tax, etc. And then the next is the detailed report, which is, like it says, very detailed. It's going to break down those charges not just by like whether or not it's a mandatory contribution or an employer share contribution, but down to the individual member. It'll have their name listed, their pension ID listed, the period dates that those wages were associated with, the contributions that were calculated, and the dollar value of those contributions, etc. If there were any service credit days, they would be here. If this is a turf unit. So these detailed reports just have really all of the information that you could ask for when it comes to reviewing a previously paid submission report. But this one is more comparable to an itemized receipt compared to the summary report. But again, you can see everything on a per member basis. And then the payment report shows which bank account was charged for the payments that were made. But it also, similar to the summary report, breaks down the general charges as a as far as the mandatory pre-tax, mandatory post-tax contributions, employer contribution share, etc. But the main difference really between the payment report and the summary report is the fact that this does show you where that charge was charged to. It'll give you that bank account information. Though of course it is still like censored. It's not like your full like routing number or anything. And then with this next payment report that I wanted to show you, this is what it would look like if you had a credit applied. So in this example, essentially, if you had previously had to go back and enter an adjustment where you removed wages and contributions for a member, when we remove those contributions that were previously paid, we don't necessarily reimburse the bank account directly. Instead, we give you a credit within ERM that'll just be applied automatically to the next report that you submit for payment. So in this example, you can see, especially if you look at the bottom there and at the top there, in red is where that credit was applied. But also at the bottom, you can see that where it kind of gives that payment summary where like the bank account was charged, but then there was also like a certain payment amount that was applied. And that was a credit from a previously made adjustment where they reversed off some contributions. So if you ever need to be able to like kind of like have some evidence of having that credit and using that credit, this is going to be what that looks like and where you can find it. It's going to be on that payment report. And then I went over this a little bit ago, but essentially, like for those members that don't have those plan elections, again, you're just reporting those wages and service credit days if they are enrolled in the turf unit. And then once that plan election has like defaulted or been entered, again, those contributions are going to retroactively be added on to the next payment. One thing to keep in mind, though, is it does not mean that it's going to be the next regular wage and contribution report. If those retroactive contributions like are due and you're making like a small adjustment, even if it's something that otherwise wouldn't cost anything, like maybe you're just adjusting some service credit days for a teacher from like last payroll, you forgot to put those in there. Even though like that would have been like the $0 total due adjustment, if those retroactive contributions are due and that's the next report that you pay, they will be added to that report. It does not necessarily like only apply to the regular wage and contribution reports. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind. It shouldn't make a huge difference, but I know like for documentation purposes, it might be just like a nice thing to keep in mind. But if you ever wanted to review whether or not you have any retroactive contributions that like are due or will be due, there is a report in ERM that will give you a breakdown on that. So in here, if you were to click on employer reports, which is that second last option on the left side of the screen, the final report available to you with that recent member election report is where you will find the details of like how many undecided members you have, and if they were to elect by choice, what would the contributions due be? And same for hybrid, if they were to elect hybrid, what those contributions would be. And then it'll also tell you if you have any that are due right now, meaning the next report that you process for payment will have that added to it. That will have that dollar value of exactly how much is due, and also give you the information on like who those contributions are associated with. So for example, you can kind of see what that would look like in an example here. But this is just kind of helpful, especially if you know you just recently enrolled a bunch of like new members that like definitely like did not previously like exist in perf or turf. there's going to probably be retroactive contributions unless they happen to like during enrollment know exactly what plan they're enrolling. So this is handy to check out, especially again at the beginning of the school year or anytime that you're having like a lot of new employees getting enrolled. But for bank account information, if that ever needs to be updated, you would go back to that manage submission unit screen. So again, that's under employer and then under the submission unit menu. And you need to have special access in order to like view or modify the bank accounts. Not every ERM user has that access. But if you are the authorized agent for the unit, you are meant to have this user role. So if you, as the authorized agent, ever find that you are not able to view the bank account or you're not able to make updates to that, I would encourage you to reach out to our team just because the user role essentially associated with updating that bank account only went into place in the last like year and a half. And there are some like authorized agents that like just never got that updated. So if you should have that role, reach out to us and we can get that updated for you. But if you do, you'll be able to click on that little black tab and it will give you the option to update that information. It is important to keep in mind that that is not going to immediately be available to withdraw funds from, just because like we're going to have to ping that bank account and authenticate it and just make sure that everything is correct. But if you ever need any assistance there, we also do have a resource on our website that goes into depth about like how you can update that bank account, as well as like the time frame. And again, you're always encouraged to reach out to the employer advocate team. We're always more than happy to help with that. But it is also worth noting that if you need to update the bank account for more than one unit, like for example, you know, for and a Turk unit, you will have to go in and do this for each unit separately. It will not automatically carry over to the next unit. But that essentially wraps up my presentation for now. But I did want to know if any of you had any questions about anything that I went over, or just like anything in general, since it seems like we have a little bit of time to go over. I know I've been over a lot of things. Yeah.
The recent member election report, would you suggest, I think I asked the question, just about some of the problems we're having with the elections. New people actually start with interim, but they've made their elections, but it's not reflecting correctly in the interim system. Suggest whenever we get the time where we need to make those payments, run the report just to make sure everything's correct, and then contact you if not.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with your summary of that. It definitely is a known issue at this time that the recent like the member plan elections have not been like processing within the time frame that they typically do. It's something that like we're definitely aware of internally and have been working on resolving. But because of that delay, I know it's definitely created some confusion on when those contributions will be due. So in that sense, once those members that plan election is showing up for them and those contributions are due, I encourage you to like keep referencing that report, just so that way like it's not a total surprise of like what you can't anticipate, especially as far as like what that payment will look like.
Normally we don't use that report very often. We just see on this. So it was nice to hear you.
Yeah, no, of course, that is something like a very common question because that definitely has been like affecting like a lot of different like employers as far as it comes to reporting those wages and contributions.
Just got one more question. Your presentation in regards to severance, it used to be capped at 2,000 what you could report on. So has that changed based on your information that you can calculate on the full amount now?
So technically, the severance wages were never capped on 2,000 as much as the contributions of the severance wages were capped on 2,000. And that's one thing that I didn't clarify when I spoke with you previously. But again, like, if it ever is more than $2,000, we still want you to put the like full dollar amount that it is, even though the contributions will only be calculated on the first 2,000. But for the employer share, again, like it's a very hard line. It has to be calculated on only the first 2,000. So either that 11.2% of 2,000 or that 6.5% of 2,000, if we're talking about the right now of September 2025. For that mandatory contribution is where it gets a little bit more variable, where that one, it's really up to the member and the unit on whether or not that's going to be reported on the first 2,000 or the total amount. In general, you're always safe with just reporting that 3% on the first 2,000. But if your unit wants to pay on the full amount, they do have the ability to do that. And if the member was like wanting to pay on the full amount, they do have the ability to do that. It's definitely not required of them, but that minimum base requirement is at least like the 3% on the first 2,000 of those severance wages.
Correct. I think you guys changed that within the last 5 years or so, probably just about the amount that had to be in the top. And we, as the employer, contributes the entire amount. So I think it may be different as well, maybe. Because I remember it used to be where even on their portion, the 3%, it was capped for the 3% of the 2,000. But it could have changed. I always report that way, so I would never. We do the 2,000 and that's it.
And that completely makes sense. I think a lot of it too is that in general, I think it's advised that like you just report on those first 2,000s. And I think that may have like, especially in the past, that kind of misconstrued as being like that it is the same as the employer contribution share, where that one is like very hard, like red line, you have to like stop at a certain amount. But with that one, it is definitely like more variable, but often like I think just in simplifying information, it gets kind of interpreted as both contributions are capped in the first 2,000, because in a sense they are, but also doesn't have to be for the mandatory contribution. Which also just for reference, since we are talking about wages and contributions, that mandatory contribution is what goes into the member's like annuity savings account. So those are funds that the member is like fully vested in immediately, whether they make it to 10 years of vesting, whether they like make any progress in like my choice, that money will always be theirs. Versus the employer share goes to the overall fund, in which that is, if they are hybrid, the funds that will pay their pension benefit if they do vest and retire within PERS. So just like as a note, I think that's also relevant to part of why with 3% it's a little bit more variable, where it's like if that member wants to put additional money with those severance wages into their savings account, which like will be directly their money, we allow that because that is going directly to the member, versus with that employer contribution share, it is not going specifically to, you know, the specific person that you paid it on, even though it is going to the overall fund, which will inevitably give them a benefit if they do reach that vesting status. But that is part of why we're not having you guys pay extra money out of those severance wages for something that like you don't need to. But does anyone else have any questions, or if you have any additional questions, I have more. Well, if anyone does have any like additional questions they come up with later, or any that are a little bit more specific to your unit or your members, we do have another room where we have 2 members of the employer advocate team, where they're just taking down the information, so that way they can either address it with you then, or if it's a little bit more complex, we can research that and follow up with you guys like after the conference today. So feel free to like reach out to them if there is anything like really specific that you'd like to speak to us about like while you're here. But thank you so much for having this breakout session. It's really nice meeting you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.